So before we begin, I'm going to introduce our speaker here, Mark Schlossberg. Mark is the owner and principal of Hanging Valley Enterprises and the president of Simple Collaborations, a community of low-code, no-code technology experts for platforms such as Microsoft Power Platform, Now, Mendix, and more. That's breaking away from the traditional consulting model. Mark has spent 41 years successfully conceiving, selling, planning, and delivering profitable information technology, business consulting, and independent project development, while leading and managing the organizations providing these services. From 2010 through 2016, he incubated, built, and led a new Microsoft Cloud technology practice into the marketplace, incorporating PwC's unique IP, brand, and value proposition to deliver distinctive and profitable offerings, solutions, and products for the enterprise market. After almost 7 years at PwC, he returned to Hanging Valley Enterprises and founded Simple Collaborations to have a more direct effect on actual business outcomes and help individuals and organizations build and leverage skills around the use of readily available low-code and cloud technology to enhance business value. So before I hand this off to Mark, I just want to note for everybody that there is a QA feature at the bottom. You can click that, put in your questions. Actually, somebody says that chat seems to be disabled. Abraham,
I got it solved, yeah.
Oh, you got it solved? All right, cool.
Yeah,
Good question. Thank you for answering that. So feel free to post your Q&A throughout the whole process. We will have a Q&A portion at the end, but post them anytime you have them. And if there's a good pause, I'll make sure it gets asked and Mark can answer them. So with that, please, Mark, take it away.
Thanks very much. Welcome, everyone. I see some familiar names and some unfamiliar names, so I'm glad you all came and joined us today. I'm looking forward to this. We've been Abraham in particular, and Sean and I have been preparing this for a few weeks, and as we built the Simple Collaborations community, and this is really our first time going live after making a whole bunch of short videos to get things going. So we're going to talk today about a variety of topics, but what we're really going to do is, let's see. There we go. So what we're really going to do is compare and contrast two separate organizations and organizational challenges around low code. I've been very fortunate over the past 5 or 6 years to be directly involved with the evolution of the Microsoft Power Platform. Came directly out of the work that I had done previously at PwC, and I've been able to grow through the product's evolution. And over the last 3 years in particular, I have been fortunate enough to work with a good-sized organization through a pretty much a complete life cycle of the application build, and really work with them on the business aspects of a technology solution, and be able to take advantage of the fact that low code allows one person or 1.5 people to build a whole application that might have been tackled previously with, you know, a half a dozen or even a dozen people, either onshore or offshore, doing all different kinds of regular code or traditional coding types of technology. So in this 45 minutes or so, we're going to review 2 different organizations, and we're going to look at their use cases, both their similarities and their differences, and how the requirements of these different organizations affect the use of low code. We'll examine that each of the projects are in different stages, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But we're also going to see some common underlying elements and themes. We're launching the second one right now, and we're using a lot of the learnings from the first one to guide the development, even though it's a different kind of company, different business problems, etc. And finally, we'll look at the lessons learned and applied. So what we have are 2 different organizations with, for me, you know, I've had direct experience with both. for a long time, actually. The company that I've spent the last 3 years with, and really I turned the application over to them in December of this past year of 2021, and they're basically running on automatic at this point with just a very light touch support from me, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But they are a 9-figure annual revenue. They happen to be a commercial seed distributor, but the distributor portion is really the most important part of their business process. It happens to be seeds, which has some interesting aspects in the fact that their product is a live product. It has expiration dates that they have to handle when they look at selling. But otherwise, it's a pretty traditional distributor. They're old. They've been around for 25 years, and they are a subsidiary of a much larger family-owned distribution business, happens to be across a wide variety of agricultural commodities. But each one of those companies is separate, and we were specifically working with one subsidiary, which is important to the story as we go. And they're growing slowly, generally slow to medium-sized growth, although they were experiencing some step functions in terms of their growth. They had acquired a couple of companies, and they were trying to react to some of those changes. And so a lot of our work was generated by that step function of growth. But in general, they are a slow to medium growth company. We're going to contrast that with another organization, a very small husband and wife shop. It happens to be my son and daughter-in-law's farm, but they are on a very steep growth curve, and they do organic vegetable growing, and they have a particular niche, and they've been at it for about 7 years now and have doubled just about every year. So you would classify them more as a startup. They're basically bootstrapping everything that goes on, and that's that changes the way they think about things and opportunities, in particular for something like a low-code program. So if we were going to really drive a little deeper into the distributor, let's see some of the characteristics that I found when they came to me and said, we need to make some changes in our organization, and the way we work. And they kind of came to me saying, well, we think we need to buy a packaged CRM program. That's what everybody's telling us. And so that was sort of the entry point for me when they approached me. And as it turned out, what I found was a little different. What I found was a 25-year-old ERP system, happened to be JD Edwards, and an older, quite expensive reporting system, happened to be Cognos. And their internal IT organization was just focused on keeping it running on a day-to-day basis. It serves the over $1 billion revenue of the overall organization, and each of the 32 subsidiaries is really just a piece or a cog of that. Another aspect of it is that they have about 120 employees that I'm working with. I'm focused primarily on their 60 or so person sales force and 20 or so sales associates or sales support staff. The workforce is primarily older, with the older salespeople driving the bulk of the sales. But there is turnover, and they can see that many of these people are probably less than 5 years away from retirement, and they can definitely see their organization changing as these people retire and newer, younger workers come into the workforce. For a variety of reasons, they've been saddled with a lot of cumbersome manual business processes. And a lot of what our conversations have been is, how do you move quicker and get the business process streamlined and more modernized? The other thing we discovered was very, very complex set of tribal knowledge around the data. Some of the data was in the legacy ERP, some of it is kept in spreadsheets. Most people who've worked in these spaces would find it very familiar. But the challenge was, even doing a project was just knowing where the right data was and understanding the relationships. And part and parcel of this was, of course, that a lot of the data quality had just been buried for years. They get the data, enough data to get the job done, but there's not any time spent actually answering real live questions about what works and what doesn't, and where is the data, and is this right? And they spend a lot of time looking at reports saying, this report doesn't seem right, or it doesn't match with another report. And that was a really critical aspect of what they came to me looking to fix. And finally, because of the legacy ERP and the way they manage it, to their credit, they've managed to go 25 years without customizing the software, which is why it's still running. They've been able to take the updates from the vendor, but that means that they go out to each of these subsidiaries and say, this is what you get. You have to use it as is. Don't ask us to make any changes for you, because this is the way we run the software. Now, we're going to contrast that with this small, fast-growing organic farm. We're only talking about 10 or 15 employees right now, but essentially doubling every year to 2 years. They have extensive compliance and operational needs. For a small entity, we're going to talk a lot about food safety and organic certification. And the amount of reporting they have to do for a little small organization is just staggering. And that really is driving our overall requirement set. The other thing is that, as they started from an acre 7 years ago and are now up to 27 acres this year, and they're going to go to 42 next year. Every process they've built from the ground up. So the good news is they have pretty much a greenfield or a blank sheet. The bad news is everything has to be carefully worked out along the way. The other thing is, as with many startups, they got started with a hodgepodge of IT. A little Google Apps, a little QuickBooks, a little of this, a little spreadsheet here, lots of manual processes that they just do on spreadsheets. And the goal really is to transition now, while they can, to a modern set of integrated tools before it really gets too big and too unmanageable. They have a unique requirement, which is they have people in the field, in the rain, in the cold, in the heat, and a lot of the data sets that they need to capture for their compliance, particularly for compliance, are happening from the field. And so, right now, mostly what's happening is that data is collected and put into a spreadsheet back in the office. And the goal really is to give the employees tools on their smartphones or a tablet, or maybe at the pack shed, the wash station, give them tools so that they can put the data in immediately, right at the source, and then have that be visible over a long period of time. But that all-weather component in the field really changes how the requirement set is built. And the final part about this, and this is not really, again, as I was saying, you could think about this as kind of any startup. But in this particular case, they have one thing that is kind of unique to the agricultural side, is that, people think about gigantic farms, mega agriculture, cornfields, corn growers that are running 7,000 acres of the exact same variety of corn. But in order for them to be able to be resilient and be able to react to changes in weather and market conditions, they grow a wide variety, 40 or 50 different varieties on that 27 acres. Now, this drives resilience in terms of their business model, but it also adds a significant amount of complexity that they're going to have to address as part of their operations. So let's look at the distributor use cases. Anybody who's worked with any kind of distribution knows that it's a pretty standard, what do they say, order to cash is the standard piece. You got to purchase the product, you got to stock it, You got to maintain it in their case because it's a live product. It has an expiration date, just like if you were selling fruit or vegetables, they're selling seed stock. You got to sell it. And in their case, their virtue is that their salespeople go out and visit growers throughout the country in some of the most remote areas. And while they're sitting there talking to the grower is asking, can I get this variety or can I get that variety? And how much of this can I get? And the salesperson who's out there talking has to be able to answer those questions immediately. And that, if you wanted to say, was the driver, that is the primary driver in our whole project. Is prior to us putting this solution in place, there were a lot of phone calls, there were a lot of text messages or emails from the salesperson from the customer to the salesperson, from the salesperson to the sales associate who worked directly with the online inventory system. And then back, all the information would go back through so that they could answer a very simple question: how much of this can I sell today or in the next 2 weeks? Then you got to deliver the product, invoice it, and collect the money. Pretty standard set of operations for a distributor. And so what we developed was a set of use cases around mobile access to the real-time inventory and sales information, and it had to be operational on smartphones, tablets, and laptops. Okay. We also had to have a direct connection to the legacy ERP. We were not going to touch it. We weren't going to enhance it or change it, but we needed to deliver data directly to it that was compatible and could be consumed with it, so that after they did their work in the field, all the rest of the work would be done using the legacy ERP, because that legacy ERP system will survive probably much longer than I will be alive. And it's a difficult system to use. There are very few people in the company that are trained to use it, but it's not going away anytime soon for a variety of interesting reasons. The CEO and the management needed to see data on a daily basis. They don't need real time like what's there right now, like the salespeople do, but every morning they want to get up and see what got sold, what came in, what products came in from the suppliers, how are we doing, how much is our inventory, how much are we holding. They needed that, and we'll take a look at some of those features. And finally, we wanted to streamline those sales processes that I just described, that link between the customer, salesperson, sales associate, or consultant, and back out. So now we're going to take a little look at the app as it was developed. So this is the full app, the menu, the drop-down menu. This is Microsoft Power Apps, and this is a tablet or desktop version of it, and we'll show you both the desktop version and the smartphone version. They are parallel with different things stuffed into them based on use. So this was the full application. You see the pull down menu, and we'll go through each of these things as we go. But you're seeing the main screen. The main driver of this system is, can I look up inventory? And that's what you're seeing here. But let's take a look at how do we do that same thing in a smartphone. Now, we are using all the same core data, and we're using a lot of the same core underlying data access techniques. But we've completely reformatted the product so that it fits onto a smartphone and is good when the guy's pulled over on the side of the road. We did not implement this in a disconnected mode, although that was an option. As it turns out, generally they are in cell connection for even the most remote customers. There are some field trial areas where they do not have cell service, but when they're out selling, they mostly have cell service. So we were able to do this real time, and this talks directly to a real-time data warehouse that the company maintains. So all of these numbers are accurate as of 5 minutes prior, and that's good enough. Okay, so we're not actually going directly into the live ERP. We're doing a replicated data warehouse that the company already had built, but was not really using very effectively. So here you have the real-time screen where they can look up varieties and see what's available. And again, the same screen, the same information, but in a larger format. And here what you're seeing is on the top level, you're seeing what was on that previous smartphone. And the lower level is actually lot level. And here you're seeing the kind of detailed information that is part of a live product. What date did we receive the lot? What are the germination rates that they have to report to the clients? When does the product expire? If product expires, it can be retested. And so all of that information has to be handled and displayed, because this is what determines what a salesperson can sell. And oftentimes they are trading lots. One customer may want more than a particular salesman has in their inventory. And so they may call up another salesperson and say, hey, I need more seed than I have in this lot, but I'd like to deliver it all in a single lot. So that this screen provides that information. It's also driven by security right from the very beginning. So here, now a salesperson wants to look up sales orders, but they're really not allowed to see sales orders from other salespeople. They can only see their own. So the application was built with security right at the core, role-based security, who you are and what your role is. And so this is the same thing. Now, the next question that gets asked is, "Where's my order?" When the customer says, "Hey, I ordered this a week ago. When am I going to get it?" This actually queries the sales orders in the legacy ERP system to see when are they going to be delivered, and when can I expect them. And again, same thing. We had one screen for their smartphone when they're out there, and then one screen for either a tablet or a desktop when they're back in the office. Some of the guys are running tablets, some of them aren't. It's been very interesting, people's approach to the form factors. What they would tell me during the requirement session turned out to be very different when they actually had these applications in their hands. We've also built some features in that are quite interesting that they talked about during the requirement session, which is, well, I'd like to be able to enter complaints and associate them with a particular lot of product, for example. And we added that, and it's very nice because now if they do get a complaint, they can actually go and see, have we shipped this lot to anybody else? Is there a problem? Can we pull this seed back, or can we contact the people in case there is a problem? And if we have stuff in inventory, we may not want to ship that. We may want to ship some other piece. So we have that ability to track that, and it's built right into the app. But we're going to talk a little bit about this in the future. As it turned out, this was a big eyes syndrome. Everybody said this would be a great feature. We built it into the solution, and now their actual business processes are not ready to accept it in an automated manner. So we'll talk a little bit about that, because that's important when you're building this type of system. The next piece was actually getting the orders in. So initially, it's building a pending order or a quote. And then once that quote is approved by the customer, then they hit a button and it will go directly into the legacy ERP. That was a critical piece because that was an area where we combined high code with low code, and actually low code from the other vendor. The legacy ERP vendor has a tool that they call Orchestrator that allows them to build and expose an API that lets them capture data from elsewhere. And so what we did in a low code basis was, well, first of all, we spec'd what that data had to look like for a typical sales order. And then we built that in low code and transferred it over. And that we probably spent the most amount of actual time tweaking that to get it working. That in conjunction with really working on the data quality and wrangling the data. The two, between that and the API, were the two heaviest investments in the project. And then we went beyond that to be able to print formal quotes. This happens to create a PDF on the fly using other Microsoft tools. but all directly into the app. So this is a single app that they can use to do everything, including texting customers or texting sales associates, sales coordinators, and they can email quotes and orders directly to the customers if necessary. And so this was an added feature that actually, interestingly enough, they didn't need. Again, something that they wanted, but in reality didn't actually use. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. So the next part here was sales coordination. When you're working with two different systems, there was a lot of things that the salespeople needed the coordinators to do offline. And how are they requesting those? In the past, they would just basically send an email or a text or a phone call. And you can imagine those things just get lost. There's a new variety to put in, a new product ID needs to be put in, or I have a new customer, or that customer has a new ship to. I need you to put that in the system before I can add the order. This allows them to track all that activity, as well as track the orders when they get sent from the mobile system to the legacy ERP. There has to be a mechanism by which the sales coordinators know that the order's there and can pick it up, and it's not buried in email or a text somewhere. It's actually in a dashboard that they can keep track of. So this is an operational dashboard that's being used now. We combined, so everything you've seen up until this point was built with Power Apps, Power Automate for connecting to a lot of the data and engineering the workflows, and a combination of SQL Server data, which was their data warehouse, and Dataverse, which is the Microsoft Power Platform data store, for all the data that is new and separate and different from the legacy ERP. Now, what we needed to do was the management was now looking for a way to every morning come in and see how this changes their operations. What happened yesterday? How is it affecting profit? How is it affecting the level of inventories that I'm carrying? What's selling? What's not selling? And so we built this full Power BI dashboard over the same data sets as the Power Apps tools. And what you'll see towards the end of this is where we start to integrate these two pieces. So this is pretty standard. You've probably seen a lot of these sales dashboards by salesperson, by crop, product breakdowns, customers, suppliers. Again, this is a standard distribution use case. Now, of course, one of the nice parts about Power BI is its ability to really visualize the data. So you can slice and you can dice, you can get visuals on there, and you can see how you're doing along the way. Now, this could even be real time, but there are some costs associated with real time that drove us to a every morning at 5 o'clock refresh. And but the data doesn't change that much during the course of a single day that they needed to have that. And the overhead that a fully real-time dashboard provided was probably more than anybody was willing to accept. But again, a lot of these look like eye candy today, but they're very useful tools. And quite frankly, when we looked at who's using which parts of the application, the CEO is in this tool every day, multiple times. This is what he uses to manage the business. Here's an example of where we started to integrate Power Apps and Power BI. We needed to build an over 60 AR. They're constantly, which customers are behind, who hasn't paid us, but it's the salesperson's responsibility to make those AR collection calls. And we didn't want to have two separate apps. So what you'll notice here on the right is an embedded Power App that allows a salesperson to pick a customer, make an AR collection call, collect that information. When are we gonna get paid? Who did I talk to? And when am I going to get paid? And this actually writes this data back to the database so that we can integrate both a display of data and a data capture piece. Now, I haven't talked about this, but one of the other areas of security is this is all driven by a sales hierarchy. Salesperson can only see their own sales data. A regional manager can see their sales, the sales for all of their salespeople. And of course, the executives can see across the entire company. And that's all built in directly using low-code techniques. But without a lot of heavy coding, we were able to build this without much effort at all. The last place in here is the supplier booking tool. This is another area where the salespeople are called on to do forecasts for next year because they have to own their inventory. And so they go and look at what their customers bought the previous year. They talk to their customers. They say, well, I'm going to plant more of this, but I'm not going to plant as much of this. And they are going to be forecasting directly off of this tool. Now, interestingly enough, this was another example of where they got a little ahead of where they were willing to work. So we built this and we started to test it out. And their traditional method of doing forecasting for the next year was the way most companies do it, which is they send around a spreadsheet, you fill it in and you send it up, and someone has that painful job of consolidating all the spreadsheets. We built this so that they don't have to do that. But it was interesting. That was such a large change in the way they operated. And we were going into the high season where they're busy selling. And it was very clear that was not going to get implemented. So the tools are there, but the implementation will drag on maybe a year, maybe 2 years before they're really ready to make the necessary changes. The last part of the application that's important to look at is the how we monitor every activity in there. So this is both for security and for ROI calculations and a variety of things. This is a real-time screen that we can go into anytime to see who's logged on, where did they log on from, and what did they do. And we can look both at logging onto the system, going and checking inventory varieties. So we have the ability to go forward and do some very sophisticated things like I can probably feed this data into an AI model and have them predict what orders are going to come in the next 1 to 5 to 12 days or 15 days. Because if someone's checking for a variety, it means that there's likely going to be an order X number of days beyond that. We have all of this data. That's going beyond where they're ready. So there's a lot of things that you can do that companies are generally not quite ready to. They talk about it. It sounds good in magazine articles and things, but when you actually talk to a company about really doing it, they're not quite ready. But it does yield interesting information. So for example, we have both the tablet application and the smartphone application. You can see the relative percentage of what people are using. The dark blue is the smartphone. So people still like the tablet or the desktop version. You can also see the distribution of where all the salespeople are. They're scattered through the whole country, and you can see how often they get on and who's using what and all of these aspects of here. Now we get a little farther in here because we're really trying to judge adoption. We're trying to see which salespeople are really putting the orders in directly and which ones are still using the old way where they call it in or email it to their sales coordinator. And so you can see that these are the top salespeople. Of our 60 salespeople, truth is we've only got 5 or 6 that are really using the order entry portion of it. And there were salespeople early on that said, I'm never going to put an order in through this system. And there are other salespeople that were begging for this type of system. And so you have to balance all that. And we've spent a lot of time talking about incentives for them, for how they would actually get a salesperson to put their orders in. Do you pay them $1 an order? Are you going to use a positive incentive? Are you going to use a negative incentive? There's all kinds of ways of doing it. But this way we can track. Nobody's escaping visibility here. And similarly, this is the beginning drivers of a ROI screen. So I have obviously not put all of that on here, but you can see these are key functions here. And we've done time motion analysis for each of these things. So getting a variety, checking a variety over the last roughly year, last fiscal year, there have been roughly 13,000 or almost 14,000 variety checks. Well, we know that costs in productivity anywhere from $10 to $35 per variety check in terms of time spent by labor. And so it's very easy to do an ROI calculation, and you can start to see which areas get used the most and which ones, were worth spending the money and which ones maybe were extra and we probably could have left them off. So where is this project? This project is mature and in production. I really haven't been involved in this now for almost 7 months. I will occasionally go on and check to make sure things are working and check in with them, but we have turned this over to their own IT organization. This was 3 years. We made no changes to the legacy ERP with the exception of creating the connector so that we could dump the orders in. There was a lot of time during those 3 years where we spent reviewing the data and how it's structured and how it's reported on and building additional relationships that they used for reporting purposes that it was all basically done on the side of the desk. And now all of those things are built directly into that dashboard set that you saw. Now we released this quarterly. We probably had almost 12 releases. I would say more like 8 to 10, with a lot of little releases along the way. And each time we add additional functionality as well as stabilize or reworked sections where we find that there need to be changes. The other thing about this is because we knew we were turning this over to an established IT organization, I needed to build complete solution documentation, which is rarely done in a low-code situation. A lot of these things are one-offs, and you build them and you dump them on there, and God help the guy or the gal 6 months from now or a year from now who has to go in and make changes. But we have published all this and actually built it integral to the application. So much of the solution documentation is live inside the app, as well as a version for the IT organization. One of the two key findings here is that there was a lot of big eyes. We added a lot of features that people said they really wanted, primarily because we wanted to encourage them to use the system. And if they had, if we felt that if they had a voice in building it, they would be more inclined to use it. Well, that was true up to a point, and the challenge there was that oftentimes they asked for things, and when they actually got it, we discovered that, well, they might have asked for that because they thought we couldn't do it and they thought we could stop things. But other times it was just they weren't ready for it. It's a great idea, but they're just not ready. The last piece of this was that they are finding that they're growing into seasonal, operational, and user realities. And without driving adoption in certain ways, the things that make their life easier, like looking up inventory status, everybody uses. The things that would be better for the organization if they did them, but would require them to work a little harder or do an extra step or two, those are things that are a little harder to get accepted. And I think that's a really important part of any project, but in particular a low-code project. So now let's contrast this with a brand new, fresh greenfield operation. So here, this is a little more specific to an agricultural case, but you could imagine this as a small manufacturer that's starting up, anything where you've got some unique aspects of the business, okay? In their case, they got to germinate the seed, they got to get it into the ground, they got to grow it, and they got to process it. And as a result, they've got to track data at its source from every one of these steps. Greenhouses, fields, in the fields, they have wash and pack sheds, storage, and every one of those has a recording requirement because God forbid somebody gets sick or there's some contamination on a product or something like that. How do you, particularly if you're a small company, how do you control the cost of that type of recall? And then every year they have to recertify their organic certification, which is also extremely time consuming and detailed oriented. And without having to go and compile 40 spreadsheets or more, they would like the data at their fingertips so that when the certification rolls around, they can just build these reports automatically, deliver them to the certifying authority. And that's the key to dollars and margin for them, because the prices they get for organic certified product are dramatically higher than conventionally grown product. Now, you can extrapolate that to anything that's custom to your business that gives you a higher margin. What we're looking for is an integrated management dashboard that is not unlike what we built for the distributor. The difference is there are different things that we'll be tracking: seasonal production throughout the season, 40 plus varieties, certification compliance for both food safety and organics. And the other trick is there is a lot of processes. There's a lot of handoffs. And how do you capture the data when it gets handed off? When the seed, the transplant goes into the ground, you need to know when that happened. You need to know what the weather was. You then need to know all of the when someone's doing irrigation or fertilizing. Those are all process steps that need to be captured and recorded. And there's all these handoffs between individuals and teams. And so we want to build the application in a way that's going to drive that. So these are kind of eye charts, and we're going to talk a little bit because the project is immature. We're building this from scratch. And so what you see here is a list of all the tables that are going to hold the data. One of the beauties is we get to start this from scratch, but that means we have to think carefully through all of the data sets that are there. Again, an eye chart, this is built out of Power BI directly off the data set, but you'll see in blue seeding records, planting records, and harvest records. That's the core of the operation. And all of the rest of these are what we would call dimensional analysis, ways to dimensionally analyze the data so that if someone asks a question, we can pull it out. What was grown in this field and this bed on this date? What happened to this bed on a given date? Was there irrigation? Was there fertilizing? Was there some kind of pest management? And then in the pack shed, did we harvest it and throw it directly in the cooler, or did we harvest it and put it through a washing process and then put it in the cooler? Each one of these things needs to be recorded, and they currently do this manually, and you can imagine how hard it is as the organization has grown. So what's their stage? So very early planning and design. We're working on this right now. But interestingly enough, we have two owners. One of them happens to be my son. The other is my daughter-in-law. And they have complementary domains that we're using to design the application. One focuses on finance and operations. The other focus on the growing operations. Okay. Now, as it turns out, one owner, my son, has lived through the 3-year distributor solution building experience as a salesperson. And so he knows now how this process is going to get done. And he can apply that knowledge as an owner to getting this solution built over the next 1 to 3 years. We're directly involving their employees. They have 3 employee leads who are doing the design work. And we have 7 of the employees will be engaged as testers in the field and trying this. So we're not designing this in a vacuum. This is being designed with the hands-on of the people that are doing it. And that's probably the critical aspect of low code that is very difficult to do in a traditional environment. So where are we? I showed you the 2 pictures. We're currently analyzing data, the data requirements and the structures, and we're validating those data structures as we go with the data that's been hand collected, so that we're trying not to make a lot of mistakes and end up with a lot of rework. It takes a little more extra time up front, but we think that the solution will be available to use much quicker. We're currently building the app framework. Pretty much what you saw on those screens will be available to them within the next 1 to 3 months. And we are prioritizing the feature sets based on the reality of the world. Okay. So we're getting a little long. I don't want to spend too much time. This is a little more technical, but I will say these are the key business and design patterns, business and technical design patterns that we're using. And what you'll see is security from the core, right from the beginning. We're not waiting till later to build security. And that's, of course, people's tendencies, particularly in a smaller organization where you don't always think about security right off the bat. Security is front and center. And then from there, these are standard processes, reading and writing data from some kind of place. Okay, building analytics, dashboards, reports, documents like the quote that I showed, working with barcodes. All of these things are going to come off of that. Then we have all of the data processing that has to go on in the background. You end up with a lot of data, you have to handle it. And there are a lot of opportunities to do things like AI, machine learning, artificial intelligence, and machine learning that we're going to try to incorporate a little at a time, because they always sound good in the magazine articles. They are always much more difficult when you do it for real. And the process monitoring is essential. Notifications, what's happening, knowing where, making sure that you have visibility into both your operations and the system that's keeping track of your operations. As for technical platforms, this could be applied to any one of the low-code, many low-code platforms that are out there. We happen to be focused on the Power Platform, and that was primarily in the circumstance of the distributor, because they were standardized around Office 365 on a corporate basis. It became an easy lift to put in the Power Platform. It would have been a harder lift to put in a different low-code platform, and there are dozens to choose from. But because of the Office 365 inside their organization, Power Platform was pretty much of a natural, okay? They each have different core legacy ERP or accounting systems, but that's okay because you do that with a API to each of those. There are commercial web APIs for doing things like notifications, sending text, getting weather data in, all of those things. And we're finding that having the Azure cloud or the AWS cloud available when it's appropriate makes sense. Now, neither organization is particularly in the cloud right now. The smaller organization is using cloud-based tools, but they're not really a cloud-centric organization. And the distributor is still stuck on on-premise data management. So what were our key findings? What are the things that will drive this forward? First thing is security has to be built in right from the beginning, okay? And of course, data stewardship is the key success factor. Who owns the data, who controls the data, who's responsible for it, who understands it, who consumes or updates or uses the data, and what state is the data in when you start versus after a month or 3 months or 6 months or 9 months. We found that innovation is great, agility is great, but in the distributor's case, ultimately this had to be handed back to an IT organization that just manages the day-to-day operations, because their job is to keep the lights on. So you always want to balance that. In the farm's case, they don't have an IT organization. They manage this off the side of their desk, and so we have to build a different set of sound IT practices. One of the things that we've spent a lot of time working on is unspoken truths, okay? This is particularly true in a 25 or a 30-year-old organization. You discover that there are things that are running below the surface that will affect your ability to be successful. And if you don't get at them early and identify them, you're not going to be successed. Leadership, of course, has to prioritize and drive feature adoption, okay? That's critical. And but at the same time, the users have to be involved, and somebody has to rein in the users, but you want them to be there when the project is being built, not just when they have to take it. So my recommendations are size and scale the project properly, and you got to have some early visible milestones. This is one of the real benefits of low code. The truth is, within 3 to 4 months of that 3-year run, we had a basic inventory status lookup screen for the salespeople, and we were able to release it to them. So we got an early win that really powered the system through the next 3 years. And I highly recommend finding that. And that was virally adopted. We didn't have to drive anybody to adoption or do anything. It just saved people time. You've got to have some of this. Some of this is motherhood and apple pie, fatherhood, motherhood, fatherhood, and apple pie. But when you actually do this in a real organization, whether it's with traditional IT or with low code, you suddenly get a different view of motherhood and apple pie. So perfect world goals, stretch goals, basic goals, and it has to be for value and payback, because ultimately it's got to be valuable for the user. It's got to be valuable for the organization. You've got to figure out a seasonal or rhythm of the business, because that will drive your success. You can't be driving things in when people are so busy that they're just trying to keep their head above water. You have to schedule new features. You have to make sure you allow for the training and the time for things to sink in. And that will not happen when, the old story, when you're up to your ears in alligators, it's pretty hard to drain the swamp. And, unfortunately, most organizations suffer from that. I am a strong believer in robust and self-managing solutions. I'm thrilled that I've been able to turn this over, and with almost no IT intervention from the main IT organization, other than keeping the data sets available, this solution just runs itself. And there are techniques in building low-code products that allow you to build self-managing applications that don't go down. And it's kind of a nice element. And you have to test. You have to do a lot of testing to get them there. But once you turn them over, it's a very nice feeling. It's very satisfying not to be being called all the time because something doesn't work. Getting a bottoms up versus top down adoption process, that's really important. Whether you want to pay a salesperson to put something in, even if it's just beer money, that's a decision you have to make, because it might be worth that cost because of the savings that you're getting because they're doing something different. Versus bottoms up, viral adoption is the way to go. If you can build something that people just use because it's easier, that is it. And finally, and you've seen this in some of those reports, you've got to build instrumentation, logging, monitoring, and you got to analyze and report on the data regularly, like daily or weekly. Who's using it? What's being used? Where could we benefit? Where could we get more usage? What might we do to drive it? If you haven't put the instrumentation into your application, you don't have you're flying blind in a classic analogy. So with that, I'm going to stop talking and open it up and see if there are any questions.
Well, one thing to kind of kick off, and anybody feel free to drop your questions if you have them into the Q&A box. But to just get things started, can you talk a little bit more about how you think of the trade-offs between off-the-shelf software, low code, and fully custom development? And you talked about some of the long-term trade-offs and working with an IT department, but who is each one right for? What type of business makes sense for each of these?
Well, it's interesting. If we go back to our distributor, I started this, and I think I mentioned it when they called me and said, hey, we think we need a CRM system. Now, I've worked extensively with CRM, whether it's Dynamics or Salesforce, and I know those use cases. And it was very quick to find out, once I started talking to the people, that they were not talking about any of the use cases that one of those solutions would have provided. And so that immediately triggers the buy versus build. Do we really want to buy something that doesn't bring us the use cases that we're actually interested in? And then we had to dig a little deeper. Why were they asking for a CRM system? Well, as it turned out, that they had just hired a bunch of salespeople, and they had come from a company that had a very nice automated set of tools, and they called that CRM. That was that's what it was called. It was called the CRM system. But it was instead a highly customized version that really gave them visibility into their ERP. And not and you could have bought Salesforce or Dynamic CRM or Zoho or any of the other ones and not come up with any of that connectivity. And so that's the first step. The next step is, well, how hard is it going to be to build what they really want? What they really want. Once you figured out what they really want and what they really need, and you have to filter through that too, because what we've discovered, there's a lot of wants and needs, and they're not always the same. Then it's, well, can I build it quickly with a set of low-code tools and get some immediate benefit? Or is this so complicated that I've got to engage with a professional development organization and send this project off and have it be quite expensive? Because most people know that custom software built with traditional tools is costly, prone to failure, and takes a long time. And those are all related. That's so a lot of times you can spend a lot of money before you find out that that's not what you want. And so that's where the low code tool set is really powerful, because you can prototype things and you can build things quickly and get them in people's hands. And as long as you're taking the long view, you can build a framework that you can then build around.
Right. And how do you, talking about costs and stuff, how do you think about forecasting costs for building these tools versus, the fully custom development life cycles? It's easy to think about, okay, well, if we're going to buy Salesforce, that's, 10K a year or whatever that price is. So how do you approach that with these low code solutions?
So that's a very interesting question. So I had a luxury on the distributor system, and I similarly have this luxury with the farm, is that the challenge with forecasting costs is usually they're dependent on outside circumstances. Building screens and tools with low code is very, very predictable. And I built this tool set. I built everything in this tool set myself, with the exception of the Power BI reporting, which I contracted with. So I have very detailed metrics about how long it took me to do screens. And one of the nice things is that if you have the ability to control your environment, this can be a very predictable piece. You can predict. In the old days, and we're talking late 90s and early 2000s, there was a tool set called function point counting that big developers used, because it was always hard to come up with how much is this this going to cost? Is it $1 million project? Is it a $5 million project? Can I get it done for 500,000? And you use a tool, we would use a tool set called function point counting. Well, you can do that in a low code environment. You can say, how many screens, how many controls are there on each screen? How many buttons are there that have to do things? What does each button do? So it's actually quite easy to come up with that amount of predictability in the development cycle. And I was even able to do that while the Power Platform was evolving under my feet. It was not the firmest footing for a period of time. A lot of tools were changing, and I oftentimes had to rewrite something once or twice because Microsoft changed something on us, or something didn't work exactly right. But even still, the development process was very, very predictable. What's unpredictable is, are you going to get the support of an existing IT organization? Or if you're working in a smaller organization that doesn't have an IT organization, who's going to run this when you finish it? How is it going to be maintained? And then the big unknown is the data, particularly when you're going into legacy data. And I would say that probably 50% of the effort at the distributor was sorting through hundreds of thousands of historical data records and getting them organized and overlaying useful relationships for reporting purposes.
Right. Yeah. So that makes a lot of sense. And we have a question here from somebody in the audience is, Was there any discussion or thoughts of moving to Dynamics and using any of the first-party apps instead of custom building, especially in the smaller greenfield use case?
Well, in each of the circumstances we've seen is that, like, I've done a lot of dynamic CRM, and the problem is that it is a very specific set of use cases. And if you're not using those, like when the notion of an opportunity and a prospect converting to the Dynamics 365 for sales, if you're not converting prospects to customers and building a traditional sales pipeline and going through that, then unfortunately Dynamics 365 for sales is a little heavy. Okay. Similarly, customer service. Customer service is fantastic if you're handling a lot of calls from customers and you're willing to impose that kind of discipline. But it means that you have to transform your organization to the way they work. And one of the things we found with the distributor in particular is that wasn't going to happen, particularly when we were fighting the battle with the legacy ERP that was not going to change. The legacy ERP system determined their back office operation. And really, this was really about putting the tools, specific tools, in the hands of a group of people. Now, on the farm, again, there's not a tool out there. We've looked at agricultural support growing tools, and what we've all found is that they just don't grow. They aren't built the way these guys are going to run their farm, and they have a particular way of doing things, and it's not non-standard, but it's not amenable to picking up something off the shelf. Sometimes you could do that, but it's not. A lot of times it's fitting a square peg in a round hole or vice versa.
Right. And that applies to all different kinds of industries.
All different kinds. It doesn't really matter. And it's always important to do it because I'm certainly not going to be writing a new finance and operations system using the Power Platform, because that road has been hoed long before me. But when we're getting into really the way a business runs and makes them unique, that's an important consideration.
So we're past the top of the hour, so we have one more question to answer. This will probably, I think, be the last one. And the question is, so from a business perspective, do you look to build long-term relationships with companies where you've implemented your low-code, no-code technology?
Well, that would be ideal. One thing we haven't talked about at all in here is the notion of a citizen developer and building up a citizen developer organization within your group. I'm in a unique position personally that I've been doing consulting for 40 years. I don't really need to have the traditional kind of account control that I used to want when I had a lot of years left in my career and I wanted to make sure I had a revenue stream. So I think about this from both a consultant's point of view and also from a customer's point of view. And we joke a lot that after 3 years, I was the client got consultant fatigue. They were tired of me coming back and telling them all the things that we could do next. And frankly, on the flip side, I got a little consultant fatigue, which was sometimes I was tired of beating my head up against the wall and seeing things that are just obvious opportunities that could drive large amounts of money into the organization and not having the client ready to go. I think the trick is that ultimately you want, in a low-code situation, to involve people inside your organization to be able to build these tools themselves. And you use a consultant in a different manner. You might use the consultant to get started, get the core tool set up and running, but you want to have a low-code development team and maybe an IT team that can evolve these applications. And you should not be dependent on a consultant for the rest of your life. I think that's the healthiest way to go, frankly.
That's a great answer. That, again,
it's not what the consultants will tell
right?
you sometimes, because they're looking for, we always used to call it a consultant retirement act. You got a good custom app and you're there forever, but it's better if that's not the case. I think it's healthier.
Yep, absolutely. Well, really great presentation. Plenty of compliments in the comments. Really enjoyed this. I think a lot of people got some really great insights into this. So it was a real pleasure. And we appreciate everybody who came to the webinar.
Really, thank
Had
you
a
all
really
for
great
showing
time.
up.
And yeah, so Mark's contact info is up here. If anybody wants to reach out to him, has any other questions, wants to talk about any of this, just reach out to his email there. And yeah, any last words from you, Abraham?
Well, thank you everyone for coming here
Really.
today. It was a great presentation. Thank you, Mark,
And
and
for
thank you,
old
Sean.
friends, I'm glad you showed up. Thank you very much. And we'll maybe talk again soon.
All right.
All right, bye
Thank you.
everybody.